Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the strategy of the war in Vietnam. And when we talk strategy in Vietnam, we really first have to talk about the different players, right? I want to make sure we'll throw around a lot of terms, and I want to make sure that everybody understands who we're talking about when we mention a group. So let's start out with Viet Cong, right? So as we said before, the Viet Cong are kind of like an evolution of the old Ho Chi Minh's Viet Minh, who fought against the French in the 1950s, right? So the Viet Cong are a guerrilla group that exist. If you take a look at the map on the screen, right, they exist in South Vietnam, and they are supported by the communists in Ho Chi Minh in the north, who are also receiving support through countries like China and the Soviet Union. You see those red lines marking those supply lines of the communists supporting this guerrilla force in South Vietnam called the Viet Cong, or sometimes, as you'll hear in some of the literature, referred to as the VC. We also have the North Vietnamese Army that we have to contend with, right? Also sometimes referred to as the acronym NVA. So these are communist forces led by the government of Ho Chi Minh that will start infiltrating, starting in the early to mid 1960s, start crossing that 17th parallel south into South Vietnam to cause more trouble for the government of South Vietnam, who at first we talked was led by the dictator Ngo Diem, and then later on murdered in a military coup. And we will support a variety of different military leaders in South Vietnam, none of whom are able really to put together a government that's effective, right? So the last acronym that we'll throw around is ARVN, A-R-V-N, Army of the Republic of Vietnam, right? So the term ARVN refers to the troops of the South Vietnamese government that we are supporting. They are an ally of us. At first, starting in 1960, we are there as advisors, training and supporting the ARVN, and later on, as we get past the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, we will be actually fighting side by side with the ARVN against the Viet Cong and the NVA. So hopefully that straightens out all the different sides in this particular conflict, and hopefully the map also brings some more context to that. So when you talk strategy in Vietnam, you have to first talk about the person, right? So General William Westmoreland is the commander of all U.S. forces in Vietnam. He is he's the architect of the strategy. Now, prior to 1965, our strategy was described as the enclave strategy. Basically shoring up very defensible urban centers, cities, where our troops and the ARVN forces were at their strongest. We would also conduct patrols outside of those urban enclaves, but they were capped at a 50-mile radius. So this was pretty much a defensive or reactive strategy. We were kind of waiting for the Viet Cong to do something before we would react. In 1965, Westmoreland decides it's time for us to go on the offensive. You have to realize that most of the Viet Cong power and control is in the countryside, in the Central Highlands, not in the cities. So Westmoreland decides that we can't win this war by just defending cities, knowing that the Viet Cong are basically in the rural parts of the country. So the term search and destroy refers to this shift in strategy away from the enclave strategy. Our new strategy is going to be using a relatively new military technology in the helicopter. Shortly before this time, a lot of the old cavalry units of the Army, these were units that used to be on horseback, were transitioned into what we called air cavalry units. They would use helicopters, mainly a helicopter called the UE, made by Bell Helicopter, to drop large numbers of troops into strategic places in the jungles of South Vietnam where we thought the VC were. And the term search and destroy really did kind of sum up what the strategy was about. It was about going on patrols in the rural parts of the country, trying to find the enemy, trying to engage the enemy, get the enemy into a fight, and then use our superior air power and our superior artillery to destroy the enemy. Westmoreland's thinking in all of this is that we will be able to inflict so many casualties on the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong that they will have no choice but to give up. The other strategy is, in the early days of Search and Destroy, Westmoreland is really trying to focus more on the NVA. His strategy is to kind of use this Search and Destroy strategy to get the NVA out of the picture, and then the ARVN forces will be able to clean up the Viet Cong later on. The problems with this strategy is, the major problem was that the NVA were replacing or adding more than 200,000 troops to their ranks every single year. So the idea that we could inflict so many casualties they would give up really didn't work out with the amount of men that the NVA could put into the field. It also makes us think back. I know in one of the videos we saw Clark Clifford use an old Ho Chi Minh quote, and I think that quote really kind of comments on some of the flaws of the strategy. And the quote you might remember is, "You can kill 10 of our men for every one we will kill of yours. But even at those odds, you will lose and we will win." I think that really sums up one of the major flaws of this strategy. But I want you to try to find more. So I'd like you to use this clip from Dear America, Letters Home from Vietnam. We've used this documentary before. It's an HBO Pictures documentary, which actually uses real footage taken during the war. None of the footage that you will see here is stage or reenactments, all real footage, coupled with actual letters that soldiers wrote home from the war. And they have actors reading those letters dramatically. So you're basically, in this clip, going to hear a little bit about our strategy through the eyes and through the words of the soldiers that actually tried to implement that strategy. So what I want you to do in this, I think it's a little under 10-minute clip, is I want you to watch this and try your best to find other problems, questions, things that don't make any sense, that you can see potential flaws in this strategy and potentially why it didn't work out. And then obviously we'll share out in a discussion, all right? So watch this clip and we will talk more. So one more point I just wanted to throw out there before you jump into watching this video is in addition to the video, I want you to take a look at the map, all right, and take a look at the areas in South Vietnam where most of the major fighting between our forces and the Viet Cong are happening, and that would be those areas that are kind of shaded in with those tan lines. Take a look at the map. Take a look at where that fighting is taking place, and I want you to think about another potential problem, challenge, and flaw in this search and destroy strategy that might exist due to geographic reasons. And that's something else that we can discuss later on. All right? So again, enjoy the video, and we'll talk soon.